Welcome back, everybody. So today we're gonna do a large plate demo, and this is all for all of my advanced pudges out there, people who know how to use more than, I'd say, 2 pounds of clay. So first thing, have your clay wedged and ready to go. Make sure you have a good idea of the middle. And get your clay as close to center as possible. Give it a little extra love so it doesn't move around on us. And here with larger pieces of clay, sometimes I like to apply pressure down along the sides with my middle finger so that I really seal the connection between the clay and the bat. Once water gets underneath the clay, that's what makes it slide around and whip off your bat. So we want to make sure we avoid that. Once your piece is secure and you're ready to start centering, add plenty of water onto your clay and your hands. I'm going to start by coning down just to make sure that the clay is cemented. Now, for coning up, this subsection of your left hand and your right hand is going to sit flat, flat, flat along the bat. You want to make sure that your hands are scraping the bat. Not just, oh, I touch it, like really apply pressure. Straight down, and while you're applying pressure down with both hands are going to squeeze inwards. Your digits, your fingers do nothing. It's all the pads of your hand and a lot of downward pressure here. Applying pressure down and in. I'm going to break for a second. If you guys notice, I'm not applying pressure, but if you guys see how my wrists were straight the whole time, I'm not bending. We want to make sure our wrists are straight, and that's going to help us with stability. It's also going to help us over time, making sure that we're not abusing our body or putting too much pressure on our wrists, because that can create carpal tunnel over time. Especially the more weight you work with in terms of your clay. So then, if you guys can notice, there's a little indentation that's a little taller. I'm going to keep up with that. Now that we've indented, I'm going to continue that pressure inwards and bring my hands all the way up. Make sure you're collecting and reusing a lot of this slip. Slip is like coconut water for clay. It's very conceited, so it really loves itself, and it loves a watery version of itself. It is very true. So now for the cone down, with this chubby part of your hand, we call that the lifeline in astrology. So, or I guess palm reading, whatever. So with this part of your hand, on your left hand, your non-dominant, you're going to nestle into this top section of your clay and gently push towards the top of your wheel, or what we call 12 o'clock. And while you do that, your outside hand, your left hand, your non-dominant, is going to be shaping the outside of the clay, while your right, your dominant hand, is going to push straight down. I like to wrap around my thumb when I do this for stability. And with my top hand, I keep it super, super flat, and I'm using the inside chubby part. You see where all that clay is missing? Right here. This is what I'm using to apply pressure down. Reuse some of that slip. And again, make sure your outside left hand is applying pressure in consistently. Make sure you're breathing. That is critical throughout the process. If you're not breathing, you're not really giving yourself much help. All you're doing is stiffening your muscles, which is one nice thing, but you're restricting motion simultaneously. So if you have to move and be stiff, it's not very helpful. So you do want to make sure you have a rhythm of breath. I don't want to go too flat with this guy. I'm going to start coning up again. Remember, keep both hands flat along the bat while you apply pressure in. And because this is a lot of clay, I'm going to end up rounding the top. The way we do that is you want to make a rounded kind of cup shape with your right hand, your dominant hand, and drag your knuckles towards the outside of your pot. You see, we're making this kind of rounded hill form. The reason for that is that rounded hill really prevents any of the volcanoes that are trying to form when you center your clay. It's better, but I'm still getting a little one today. That's okay. Alright. Same thing, apply pressure away from yourself with your left hand, your non-dominant, while applying pressure down with your dominant hand. Need to take a water and slip break. Now you want to always make sure you center any piece at least 3 times. When I say center, cone up and cone down at least 3 times. Air bubbles can sometimes hide in the very, very center of your clay. It's not necessarily hanging out towards the outer ring. So you really do want to make sure that you've worked with this enough that you get out all of those air bubbles. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead clean my bat up a little bit, see what I'm working with. All right, we're going to center this one more time. And then start with the official throwing. Alright, looking pretty good to me. The way to tell if you're at home and you're not sure if your piece is centered, stop the wheel, clean everything up, take a deep breath, go as fast as the wheel can go. If it looks the same in motion when it's stopped, it's centered. So now since we're making a plate, we're going to keep flattening this dude out. The way I do that is I make sure my outside hand, my left hand, is keeping shape on the outside here. If your left hand is not putting in work, then this is going to be a very uneven plate. It's not going to be centered. So you really want to make sure that this outside left hand is staying super stable. As you guys can see, I just keep compressing and compressing. I've got a little lip. If you get a little lip just like I did from your hand, you can compress it right back in. It's no problem. He said no problem. If you guys notice, I am always starting at the very center when I do my compressions out. And the reason for that is I always want to make sure that I'm pulling and I'm not creating some sort of a mountain right in the middle that I'm not going to be able to handle later. Awesome. Now this plate needs to be a specific size, so I just want to make sure we're getting there. 7, need to get it to 9. Got it. And again, really want to make sure that you're keeping this nice and even. All I'm doing now is going back with my fingers and trying to make sure that I have a nice clean line on the outside of my form as I'm flattening. Some people choose to clean it up with the needle tool. I say if you can do it with your hands, the better. Tools are great, but you always want to make sure you're learning with yourself first and then adding the aids. Perfect. And give this another little test measure. Just about there. Sometimes, if you're working with a lot of clay, another thing you can do is make your right hand into a fist. You can ball it into a fist. And then use that fist to then drag out the rest of your clay. This is only really recommended if you're working with plates, but it's a nice way to get some aggression out, if I'm honest. Perfect. Reach the proper width. So now we're going to take our needle tool to check how much clay you have to work with. We're going to poke directly into the center, follow the needle tool down to where it meets the clay, lift straight up, and that's how much clay we have till the base. This is about a solid inch. We really just need something closer to ½ inch, so I'm going to keep going down. It's always best to check ahead of time. And when I say ahead of time, it's always better to check when you think you have more clay, so that when you continue to go down the way I'm doing right now, that way you make sure you seal the hole that we just created with the needle tool. All right, I just want to check one more time for good measure. Ooh, I went way too far down. Okay. So I just went way too far down. So a way that I'm going to try and kind of patch that, I'm going to bring some more of this clay back in. You really want to make sure your clay is not soaking wet when you do this. Wet clay tends to kind of reject. When I say wet, like super, super soppy clay tends to reject other pieces of clay. Because it's like, why are you doing this? Why? I'm plenty on my own. Alright, that should be good. So now I'm going to go ahead and finishing opening up this form. I like to use a sponge for this, mostly because I have nails that I always forget to cut. But also because the sponge provides water as you open out. And that water is going to be really important in this process, especially if you have a plate. Something like a bowl or a mug, it's not as important, but a plate, it's really important to make sure that you're keeping either your fingers or the sponge or whatever you're working with lubricated as you create your pulls. Good. I'm just going back into the center and being extra cautious. And I'm going to continue to do this over and over again. Just run my fingers back and forth along the inside to make sure that the plate is compressed. Whee! Gonna keep opening this wide plate. Okay. Now if you noticed, I've stopped periodically and I've done this little thing here. This is called compressing the rim. And essentially what I do is I create a little tabletop with my fingers, my thumb and my index on my left hand and my index finger on my right come together and create a little table. These outside fingers, they just kind of hang out and collect any of the extra boogies. My right finger applies pressure down and makes sure that I'm sealing the top so that we don't have just layers of skinny, scraggly clay. So now I'm going in, making sure I compress from right to left, and then again from left to right, very slowly on this plate. Okay, good. All right, let's see. Almost where we need to be, just a little bit wider. This particular piece is actually for a custom order, hence why it needs to be very specific size. With clay, it's also important that you calculate shrinkage. On average, the clay is going to shrink something like 12%, so you just want to make sure that you account for that when you're creating something. If it doesn't matter, fantastic. If it does matter, thankfully there's ways to figure it out. Just gonna widen this guy a little bit more. It's at approximately 8 inches. I need it to be something like 9. Now what we've been throwing with so far today is 4 pounds. This is gonna get me the biggest dinner dish ever. Could also serve as a platter depending on what you're interested in. 8.5. Nearly there, nearly there. Magic. All right. I should have done it with that last one. Let's make sure. Beautiful. All right. So now with plates specifically, I really always recommend a rib. You don't need one that's huge. I'd actually suggest working with ribs, especially when you're working with at the base, the interior base of a form. Doesn't matter if it's a plate, cup, whatever. You only want to cover half. So if you see right here, this is the center point. You don't ever want to cover the very middle of it. You always want to make sure you're staying towards one half, preferably the right or the left half, depending on if you're right-handed or left-handed. So I'm right-handed, so I'm staying towards the right-hand side of my circular center point. Another way of thinking about this is you always want to work with radius, not diameter. Alright, so now I'm just making sure that my rib stays super flat, and I'm just compressing all of that work we did. And compressing, in case you're like, I don't understand what you're saying, that is when we apply pressure down onto our form to make sure, in any way, to make sure that it is flat, stable, and even. Those are the main things we're trying to get at. Okay. Hit this one more time. Perfect. Gently coast off. This is great for making sure that you don't have any hidden air bubbles in the base, for making sure that your base is even, it's easy to eat off of. Also really nice for cleaning up and seeing what you've worked with. Oh, so satisfying. All right, now the fun part. I'm gonna add extra water to the outside, compress again. So this is when we take our thumb, index finger, they're kind of hanging out, they're not pinching, just hanging out to catch any boogies and to make sure it stays shape. Our index finger on our right hand applies pressure down. I'm just catching those boogies with the other fingers. There you go. Get some of this extra water out. All right. Now I'm working with black clay today. This is very, how do I say, very watery. And so it actually will crack if you use too much water in it. Like if you're working with it and you've just oversaturated it and drowned it in water and not taken any bit of it out the whole time you've been working on it, then it will most likely crack from being too waterlogged. So you always want to make sure that after every pull and most motion, you drain the water and start again. Seems a little tedious, but it will make a difference if you're working with any clay that does not have a substantial amount of grog, is not very plastic. All right. Now, when you're doing your pulls up, it's the same as anything else. Your fingers want to match together, but especially with a plate, make sure that you're not digging your fingers down into the base that we just created when you do your pulls up. You want to make sure that it stays nice and flat. Start with my right hand applying pressure in. My left and my right hand meet and they gently coast up together with my right hand applying the pressure. Left hand on the inside. It's just a guide, just the hangout in the club for free. Not doing any effort. Get some of our excess water out. All right. And go back for another pull. We really want to make sure for this particular piece that we're getting 2 inches height. Excuse me, 2 inches and a quarter. Because again, we want to calculate for that shrinkage. And every time I do a pull up, I compress the rim. Doesn't matter what I'm working on, just to make sure our piece is even. All right, almost there, almost there. Very intense process. You do want to make sure you're breathing again. Always make sure you got that steady breath, steady rhythm. You wouldn't hold your breath in dancing. Similar thing. The wheel has a pace, you have a pace. They have to match in tandem together. Some of that water out so we can see what we're doing. I think I can get one more pull out of this guy. Yeah. We just about reached our height limit, but I got one little bit of clay left that I want to make sure I scoop up. And again, my fingertips always come up together like 2 magnets that happen to have clay in between them. Perfect. Now that's this for this piece. It's about as good as we're going to be able to stretch it. So now we're just going to clean it up, get all that extra water out from the inside. Always make sure you do this with your pieces and your clay, no matter what piece you make. You want to get all of that extra liquid out from the interior. And now I'm just going to go through, finish shaping this guy. Even though I'm about to just do shaping and I'm not doing pulls, as long as you're touching the clay, you want it to be well lubricated and you don't want it to snag on your fingers. Now with my metal rib, my outside hand is keeping shape and my inside is just gently trying to get that beautiful curve. And a nice style definition. Now I'm just, you know, finessing the piece. This is all additive stuff. Perfect, so now let's clean this up one last time. Might have just thrown it off center a little bit, but that's okay. And that's that. I hope you guys have a great day.